Somewhere in my love of the outdoors and, again, nights like this, I found an affection for TV shows and documentaries, although they're not smart documentaries, so it's not as, I just use that word because I think it sounds better than just saying TV shows. Shows that depict people living out in the wilderness, especially living alone. So while some people might binge watch The Bachelor, I'm the opposite. I don't binge watch people coming together. I love to see somebody going out there and surviving by themselves. And the further away they go, and the more alone they are, and the less resources they have, the more I will watch, and for the more hours in a row. And I know I'm not the only one. First of all, because Linda Barr, who's on our executive board, told me she watches the exact same shows. Secondly, because some of the most watched YouTube videos are some of the ones that I follow. One of them, fittingly named his channel, Self-Reliance. See? We seem to have this love for watching other people find a way to survive alone. In fact, just the other day I was caught, this might be a little more generic for some of you who wouldn't watch somebody out in Alaska. How many watch the tiny homes shows? It's the same thing, just a different version of the same thing. So somebody takes their larger home, they sell their larger home, and they live in a box. I watched a woman last week who sold her home in Auckland, New Zealand, and lives in a shipping container in the woods where she can't see anybody for hundreds of miles. We're so intrigued by this idea that people can survive by themselves. Self-sufficiency. We find it admirable. Admirable not to have to rely on other people or money or things, that we can do it ourselves, that we can pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, we can pull our own weight, we can get rid of all the things that seem to complicate our lives, and we can just do it. And yet, I think our tradition, and each of us, in fact, if we look a little further beyond the 30-minute clip that we find of someone's life, we find that this is, in fact, a myth, that none of us can ever truly be self-sufficient. And yet, it's one that we've fallen for before. I found in a book that was passed on to me the writings of Rabbi Samuel Dresner. He wrote in 1957 the following: "The sin of which modern man is most frequently found guilty is that of self-sufficiency. We want to fly like a bird through the air, swim through the sea like a fish, to harness the energy of the sun, to uncover the bowels of the earth, to build cities of steel and glass, to erect bridges which span the waters and towers that pierce the skies, to unravel the age-old mysteries of nature. All this has led, quite naturally, to the conviction that we can solve all problems, and that when people turn to religion, they say it seems superfluous, that it's just superstition, it's an old wives' tale, and that our desire to have some being called God is really just a father complex." Any of us who live life outside of these 30-minute episodes know that what Rabbi Dresner is describing, the myth that we fall for, that you can live somewhere by yourself with no help and no resources, it simply isn't true. This week's Torah portion is the story of creation. We get to go all the way back to the beginning, and we get to all the stories of how things started, or at least how our people imagined that they started. There are lots of beginnings. The beginnings of the sky, and the beginnings of the sea, the beginnings of humanity, the beginnings of a family, the beginnings of sibling rivalry. Cain and Abel is this week. And we read in the story, one of those beginnings is the need for human beings to have help. It says in the second chapter, "And the man gave names to all of the cattle and to the birds of the sky and to all of the wild beasts that God had created. Ul Adam lo matza ezer kenegdo, But Adam could not find a fitting helper among them. So God fashioned a rib taken from Adam into a human being. And Adam said at that moment, "This one at last is the bone of my bones and the flesh of my flesh." Hence, a person leaves his parents and clings to their spouse. Since the very first chapters of our Torah, Judaism has believed that we do not venture out into the wilderness alone, that we need others, that we need each other to be, ezer kenegdo, it's a great term, fitting helpers. Tomorrow morning, we are returning to the very beginning of the Torah during Torah study, and we are returning to in-person Torah study. We're going to be right here. It's going to be a balmy 55 degrees, but the Torah warms the heart, and there will be bagels and coffee. And as I do every year at this time, I want to invite you to join us. There are thousands of reasons why someone might choose to join Torah study. It is not only for those who want the intellectual practice. Some people come for learning. Some come for free bagels and coffee. Some come because they've never read the Torah. Some come for the camaraderie of being with a group of adults, a very diverse group of adults willing to talk about the heaviest things happening in this week and the lightest topics, all in the same conversation. But this year, there's an added reason. This year we've decided to study Torah with a focus on what's called Musar. Musar is not some Jewish food that you have not had, although it sounds like it. I thought it would be like a Sephardic dish. Musar is, by my definition, some would say Musar is Jewish ethics, but that's too broad. Musar is like Jewish self-help. So when you go to Barnes & Noble, or you go on Amazon, more likely now, you pick up a self-help book. You're looking for something to be more self-sufficient, like that guy living out in Alaska building his own home. You're looking for a book to lose weight, but you don't want to hire somebody to help you, so you find a book so that you can do it yourself. You're struggling in your marriage or raising your kids, but you don't want a therapist to help you, so you go to Barnes & Noble, you get a self-help book. We know that the aisle of self-help books at Barnes & Noble is one of the longest. We know that many of us have on our bookshelves all sorts of self-help books. In fact, we know the very famous series, An Idiot's Guide to Just About Everything, including Judaism, so that you don't have to ask anybody any questions. You can just have a big yellow book that you can open up and never feel embarrassed. Musar is the Jewish book of self-help, but it has a different purpose than being self-sufficient. The purpose is to be holy, which is a loaded term that is hard to define. So here's my definition, and the definition that we'll be using this year in Torah study as to what our goal is. To be holy is judged by our ability to elevate the people we value or even love above the things that we idolize, which means measuring success by how fitting a helper we can be. So Musar is Judaism's way of getting us in shape, fit to be that helper by taking care of ourselves, as they tell you on the airlines, by taking care of ourselves so that we can help the person next to us. Tomorrow we will begin with the value of anava, which is translated to be humility. And we'll discuss it as it relates to the first words of Genesis. Because along with human beings, Shabbat was created this week. Musar does not just ask us to rest on Shabbat, as we often say. It asks us to make Shabbat a day that balances our character traits. So tomorrow we will discuss Genesis, and we will discuss how we can make time for ourselves. How we make a day, perhaps, where our confidence is balanced by our humility. Down the road, we'll discuss Moses' anger, Abraham's loving kindness, Joseph's ability to forgive his brothers, not only because we want to be better versions of ourselves, but because we continue to strive to be ezer kenegdo, the type of person who's a fitting helper for those we value. In his book, the premier scholar on Musar today is Alan Marinis, and in his book, in his introduction, to the book we're going to be using in Torah study, actually. He shares the following example. He shares it as a learning that he had after he had already become a great scholar of Musar. He says, when I had already been teaching for several years, and the importance of a focus on the individual became even clearer, a chaplain in the California prison system invited me to give a talk to the women who were part of the Musar group that she led in the California Institute for Women, which was just a euphemism for a medium security women's prison. As the date for my visit approached, I found myself wondering, whom would I see when I met these imprisoned Jewish women? I had no experience in prisons. I could not imagine whether I would be meeting tough characters who fulfilled the images of hardened outlaws, or white-collar criminals who just happened to have made an unfortunate decision in their accounting or legal practice, or someone else altogether. When the day arrived, I finally stood before the group and looked out at their many faces. I saw what I should have realized much earlier, a diverse group of women who fit no single stereotype. So I said to myself, they are just neshamas, souls, in unique circumstances. As soon as I had given voice to that realization, I slapped myself on the forehead and said, we're all just like them. We are all souls in unique circumstances, which captures the basic reality of human life. We are people who find ourselves living in unique circumstances, he writes. Those of us sharing that experience right now are very fortunate to have wise ancestors who accumulated insights into human life over the past 1,100 years in the name of Musar. Although our lives are different from theirs in so many ways, human nature itself has not changed whatsoever. We can learn valuable lessons from what they observed. And so tomorrow, I invite you to join us as we begin Torah again, here in person if you'd like to have the warmth of coffee and bagels, or at home if you'd like to provide them for yourself. And this time with our eyes on Musar, the Jewish self-help guide for being a fitting helper. We're invited to help each other, to join each other, for we will all be better for it. Shabbat Shalom.